Welcome back to another episode of Dental Marketing Theory. I'm your host, Gary Bird. I'm the founder of SMC National, where we help offices just like yours compete against these massive DSOs, and we level the playing field so you can compete and grow the way that you want. Today, I have a very special guest, Steve Jensen, who's with Dental Intel, who absolutely has some mind-blowing data that I promise you don't have access to. And he's going to share with you why things are happening in the dental industry the way that they are and what you can do about it. Now, this cut off at the end, and we had some technical difficulties, but I promise you, this is an episode that you're going to want to watch. And if you want to get the most value out of it, watch it on YouTube because we're going to share a bunch of charts and things like that. Stay tuned.
Are patients paying their bills or not? So accounts receivable days, how long is it taking for patients to pay their bills? So if there's a big increase in accounts receivable in the industry, then we can predict that we're probably going to have patients getting less treatment done because they're trying to catch up on bills.
Everybody looks at totality of no-shows and they go, yeah, we're at 10%. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And so they make no decisions around this. But what I'm seeing is people are putting these patients way out. And there's actually a nuance even below what we're talking about here. So you got no-shows, total no-shows. Then you have new patient no-shows. And then inside of that, you have marketing new patients versus patient referrals. And the marketing new patients actually no-show at a much higher rate than both of those other categories because they don't know you, there's no trust, there's no relationship. All right, we are live and I'm excited again. I get the opportunity. I went to Steve and I was like, I need more of your time. And he's super busy and he has a lot going on. And I was just like, can we get an hour and just talk about numbers? And so I already know some people are going to be instantly turned off by this, but I know there's going to be a lot of people who absolutely love this. And where I want to start, I was kind of like, okay, there's so much to talk about because Dental Intel has so much information that just wasn't available before, to be honest. I lived in spreadsheets scattered everywhere. So Dental Intel's done an amazing job pulling that all together so that we can start to see what's going on in the office. And I think probably the point to start at after talking with Steve before we jumped on was right now in the dental industry, on average, there's more treatment being presented. So that's going up and that's great, both dollar and the amount of treatment, but less treatment being accepted overall. So you got one line going up and you got another line going down. And so what's going on? Like, what are you guys seeing and why is that happening?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And then I think this will be fun too, Gary. What I'd like to do is some of these answers are almost always going to have some nuance to them. So I want to hit and you can poke holes at this. I want this to be, hey, we're going to throw some numbers out here, maybe show some graphs, and then we can start poking at them, right?
Yeah, love it.
So the first one, I'll share for those that are listening. We'll obviously explain what we're looking at, but I will also share screen. So if you want to see some of the stuff that we're talking about, I'll just share.
For the audience, if you're listening on podcast and just listening in your car, that's fine. You're still going to get it. But if you want to get a better experience, go over to YouTube and watch it on YouTube. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I want to make sure that you're going to DICOMA 2024. It's July 10th through the 12th. And guess what? We are going to be speaking on the main stage and we're going to be hosting a boot camp as well. And we want to give away some free tickets. So how do you win these free tickets? You go to smcnational.com. Again, that's smcnational.com. Click the little bar that says enter to win free DICOMA, and then you submit your information and everybody's a winner. We're going to be giving a discount to everybody who enters, and we're going to be giving away some free tickets to the conference itself and to the boot camp. Make sure you sign up for these right away. Back to the show.
Exactly. So what I'm showing right here, a couple of things. So I'm showing on the screen 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. And I'm looking at a couple of numbers. Now, there's a bunch on here, but what I want to highlight is a couple of things. So I'm actually going to get this I'm going to get rid of Q1 and I'm just going to do through the end of last year. So what I want to highlight is a couple of things. So first, like Gary said, what's interesting is when I look at the average restorative dollars presented per exam, and this is really simple. We're just looking at how much dollars of treatment are getting added to all the treatment plans across all 10,000 of our customers in that time period, and then how many exams are getting billed out. And we're just dividing the two, okay? And that has increased by $100 on average per exam. And for some people, they might think like, hey, that's that's pretty that's not substantial. That's not a ton. But because exams are so high volume, it takes a lot to move this needle. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like same thing with hygiene. Like if I want to take hygiene production from like $150 on average to $200 on average, like I've got to do a lot of extra production because it's so high volume. So this is one where $100 might seem inconsequential, but it's not, especially when you take into account the other numbers that Gary mentioned. And so that's two things. One is case acceptance. This number is one that doctors like because it's higher. So case acceptance is I present a full treatment plan, which could be simple, a couple of cavities getting filled, or it could be very comprehensive. Regardless, case acceptance percentage is just simply, did the patient say yes to something? Did we get something scheduled or done on that treatment plan, the whole treatment plan? Okay, and you can see that one has gone from 78% down to 74% in the last several years.
So that's substantial because that's the same volume game, right? It's the same volume game as so dropping 4% is a big drop.
Yes, right? Like to have 4% of your patients not saying yes to at least something is a big drop. And then the other thing that I'll point out is treatment dollar case acceptance. So this one's like a little bit of a different slice of the case acceptance workflow. And it's just looking at, okay, of all the dollars that you added to the treatment plan, what percentage of those dollars actually get scheduled or completed over time? And that one has gone on average from 42% all the way down to 37%. So that has been declining for the last 3 years. And that's also significant. Like people might look at this and think, oh, it's 5%, not that big of a deal. But the truth is, and I'll stop sharing my screen here for a second. Just monetarily, for every $1 million of treatment that gets presented, we're talking about a $50,000 difference in annual outcome. So the average dentist, just for note then, is presenting around $3.2, $3.3 million of treatment, right? So we're talking about the average dentist is missing out because of that decline on $150K in production. Does that make sense? So by the time the year is over,
and it's not like a new patient production, because when you talk about let's grow our top line by 150, you're like, got to spend more on marketing, got to bring in more people, got to hire more people. These are people who already came through your system. So if you just got that 150 on top of it, basically just at that point at the end of the year, if you just bolted it on, it's like basically profit, right? Like just additional money.
So I think one of the questions, can we go here, Gary? And then I want to hear some of your thoughts. I want you to poke holes in some of this. The first place I want to go is, okay, if we could segment out the kind of the top performers in the industry, the average performers in the industry, and the bottom 10%, that might give us some clues as to like, okay, where is treatment dollars presented going up? Where is case acceptance going down, or where is it going up and down most dramatically? Does that make sense? That's going to be kind of the first piece of the story. And then we can start talking about some of the industry trends like, super GPs and stuff like that. So is that cool if we start there?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to share this document that we created that's going to break those out. And it's going to have 3 years, but I'll just call out a couple of things, okay? So the first thing is the average restorative dollars presented for exam for the average practice. If you're not looking at this, it was $1,500 in 2021. It was just under $1,500 in 2022. And it was just over $1,500 in 2023. Pretty stable. For the top performing practices, so once again, we're looking for, okay, where are the biggest changes happening? In 2021, the top performing practices were $3,300.
So basically double. The top 10% is presenting more than double what the average office is.
Exactly. Basically double. And then when you look at the top 10%, the next 2 years, all the way up through the end of this last year.
Doesn't move at all.
Doesn't really move. Where you see this huge change, and this is going to be pretty common in most of these, huge swings in the bottom performing practices. So, and the big swing here was from 2021 to 2022. We go from $800 on average getting presented down to $380 and then to $403. So we have this like big drop off.
So it cut in half.
Yes.
Right. So basically $800 average for our listeners who can't see this, average restorative presented per exam was $800 in 2021, goes all the way down to $380 in 2022 and $400. So it's cuts in half. That's insane.
Flat. Yep. And then kind of that same trend with some slight variations you see in case acceptance, which I just have on the screen, the treatment dollar case acceptance, where you see the kind of the biggest problems happening in the lower percentage, but you see some small, slight declines in the others as well. So what's interesting is that we have, when you take all of those performers, top, average, and bottom, overall, we see this increase in treatment dollars getting presented and this decrease in patient acceptance and in treatment dollar case acceptance. So then the question becomes, okay, so therefore what? What are we supposed to do with that information? What do I look at in my business to make sure that it's not affecting me? And then, is there any way we can overcome this? Now I'm interested, Gary, you work with a ton of practices. You're funneling tons of new patients into them. Have you noticed anything that points to these trends of case acceptance, or has it been kind of all is the same now in 2023?
No. I'm noticing. I got some weird stuff to share with you because I really want your feedback on it. But one thing that I noticed after COVID that it was a wake up call to me was I came out of COVID, our business almost shut down because all of our clients shut down, right? And we came out and all of our clients started crushing. All had absolutely crushing. We crushed. We made the Inc. 5000 list 3 years in a row. So I'm just thinking,
cool.
Everybody's crushing. This is awesome. But then I got the data and it was about 18 months after all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't true. It was just the top 10%.
That's right.
And then everybody else kind of suffered. And so what I realized was, I'm working with the 10%, right?
Yes.
I'm working with the 10%. I thought dental's just eating right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was a big mind shift for me was, okay, we're attracting the 10% hungry entrepreneur type client.
Mm-hmm.
So our numbers are going to be skewed. Now, with that said, the number one trend that I'm noticing right now, and this is weird data that we can get our hands onto now that we just couldn't before, is that I'm seeing clients say, I just looked at a client. This is a real life example. They have 7 locations. Of those 7 locations, their patients were down by 50% from the year before.
Wow.
Over all of them, way down. And they're like, dude, our patients are way down. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, well, why is that? So the first thing I always go look at is what did marketing do? Was that down? Did we stop spending money or something basic like that? Patient referrals were also down. But listen to this. They put 700 patients into the next 3 months out. 700 new patients. Yeah. And then I started looking at other offices and everybody's doing this. So here's what's happening. Everybody's like, we're too full to see you right now, Mr. New patient. So we're putting you a month, 2, 3 months out. And they're stacking these new patients. And I went multiple months out. But at the same time, they're saying, I need more new patients this month.
Yeah.
And it's just so I think what's happening is you got this weird, because you know how it is in the dental industry. It's no show. Well, what do you mean by, do you mean cancellation? Or do you mean no show?
Which one is it? Yeah.
Yeah. And do you mean reschedule? Is it a reschedule or is it a cancellation or is it a no show? And then everybody has a different definition and everybody tracks it differently. So I still don't know what I have to define it with the person I'm talking to. What do you mean by that? How do you track it? Are you talking about all 3? Are you talking about different things? Because I've worked with offices that take patients and when they move them, they just go, oh, no, that wasn't a cancellation, but it's an empty spot of production now that they just lost. And it's just okay, well, that's fine that you just moved them. You just slid them over on the calendar and there's no...
That's not okay. I badger people all the time. Because I'm a data guy, right? So the second someone in EagleSoft or Dentrix, the second they just move that appointment, those practice management software don't keep any record that appointment existed previously in that time slot. So unless they actually break that appointment, cancel it, and then reschedule a new appointment in the new slot.
Which takes more time. Which takes time to do.
But then there's no data around what's actually happening, right? So someone could be like, man, we're just missing on production. And even if we're trying to pull, data into this tool like a Dental Intel, then it's not going to show. Now, it's pretty obvious when I see practices doing that. It's just, their cancellation and no-show rates 1%, and I'm like, hey, probably not. The industry average right now is around 12%, and you would be wildly beating the industry.
Yeah.
Then I quickly realized, I just ask them, how are you breaking appointments? And they just move them. But
so I think this is causing, so I think when you compound all these things, so it's cool, we have data now, but it's like weird stuff is happening that doesn't sound right or look right. Why are you putting 700 patients and new patients into the future, but at the same time telling me that you want more new patients? But at the same time, I already know your patients don't want to wait 3 months to be seen. So so everybody's in this weird spot where it's just they're stuck, right? Like I don't even know how to really solve that besides, changing everything inside of dental from like the inside out. So what do you draw from that? Like what are you, like these numbers that you're seeing, what are you drawing from them and going, okay, if you owned a dental practice, this is what you would do?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So whenever I see like declines in case acceptance, there is one truth that's like somewhat helpful. And that is when you think about the dollars getting presented and the dollars getting accepted, it's pretty normal to see when we ratchet up how much we're presenting for the total dollars getting accepted to go down slightly. That is pretty normal. And kind of the game you want to play is where do those intersect? And it's kind of like the optimal place, right? Where I'm presenting a comprehensive amount of treatment that's right for the patient ethically and everything like that. And then I'm also maximizing case acceptance because in my belief, that's what's best for a patient, right? If I'm getting a lot of care done that I'm finding in the mouth, then I'm doing a good job. So that's like obviously kind of this game that people are trying to play and maximizing production. And sometimes that can come across in like this unethical way. But I think another thing that I would add on to that layer though. So patients who show up for their appointments, who traditionally say yes to treatment, who have been in a hygiene appointment 2 times or more, who have a nice reimbursing insurance plan. There are a lot of pieces of data that I could tell you that those grouping of patients are way more likely to say yes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So a couple of things that are going on in the industry that I think are really important to call out that start to put some strikes against patients. And there's a little bit of like a chicken or the egg problem. But one of those strikes is going to be cancellations and no-shows has been on the rise ever since COVID happened. Like, I don't know if it's because people now have permission to just be like, I can't come today, and they just don't want to go or whatever, or if it's legit. Regardless, cancellations and no-shows have been on the rise. They used to be on average 6 to 8%, and they've basically doubled now to 12 to 14% on average for practices.
And that's total no-show, right? Existing.
That's total cancel and no-show. And this is, once again, this is the way that dental intelligence is looking at it. And some people might say, hey, that seems low. And it might be. Remember, I'm just looking at the same cohort of practices over time. And some of them break appointments properly. Hopefully, most of them do because they're using our software. But there's a whole cohort that doesn't. And it's going to make cancellations and no-shows potentially look a little bit lower. And we try to remove some outliers as we pull data into Tableau to mess with it. But some of that, is going to be in there to help stabilize the data set. So regardless, that is one thing. So one strike against us is if cancellations and no-shows goes up, those patients statistically are less likely to say yes to treatment. So that's going to, bring things down. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Another thing that's important to call out, whenever there's financial hardship in dental's super cool. There's some cool Excel spreadsheets you can download from the ADA, okay, that goes over like total spending in the industry. And it breaks the spending up by the payers, so insurance company reimbursements, the patients themselves making the payments, and then government programs, so Medicaid, Medicare. And what's awesome is that graph has gone up year over year. And if you look at the last 30 years, we've gone through some financial troubles. Even when you look at 2007, 8, 9, what's really interesting, though, is that the mix of who's paying for that dentistry starts to change during financial hardship. So the mix, instead of it being heavy payer, heavy patient, less on the government spend. Whenever we go through a hardship, government spend ratchets up. Okay. So that's awesome for our industry, but it changes the game a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because you're focusing on like smaller treatment and
correct.
Yeah.
And the treatment sizes and acceptance
volume. It becomes a volume game.
Comes down and it becomes a volume game too. So we're in an interesting time right now where there's a little bit of unknown. Like there has been an increase in the last 18 months.
And I'm sure insurance use goes up too, right? Because if I'm like, hey, I can't spend any money right now, I need to make sure I go get my teeth cleaned.
Yeah.
It's like when you have a beater car and you're like, I have to get my oil changed. Like I don't know if my car will make it very much longer. So it's like you start to use a lot of those things at your disposal that maybe you were ignoring before.
Yeah, correct. So one of the things that's interesting is as that's happening, I hope everyone's kind of following that as government kind of spending increases, it's supplementing some of these other mixes of like, where's the money coming into dentistry? It's going up, but like, where is it going up? Might change your strategy. Now it might not, right? Like some of these practices that I'm interviewing myself are increasing their treatment dollars presented, and their treatment case acceptance is going up, and their dollars case acceptance is going up. They've created like a niche practice. Like that is definitely still possible today. Like I want to make sure that everyone knows that just because maybe the dollars coming in from patients,
there's always fringe
gets
opportunities.
Constricted a little bit. I'm telling you, there is always opportunity out there for those that want to go capture it. Like that still stays true. So that's not like a belief of mine, but it is good to look at kind of the global picture, because
especially if you own multiple offices, because that works for one office, but that doesn't work at scale, right? Like if you're like, I want to own 10 offices and I want them all to be, this outlier, it's going to be really tough, right?
Yeah. And then you might, the game might change. Like if someone's listening and they're like, hey, like, okay, they think we're going into like financial woes. Maybe they think that's going to happen. We're going to have an election cycle. It's going to be hot through the end of the year. And then it's going to be rough for a couple of years, maybe. In that situation, government spending is going to ratchet up and might be a good strategy, knowing, hey, we're going to see this big influx. So then let's hit maybe that volume Medicaid, Medicare model, maybe, right?
Which is crazy. I just learned, I didn't know this, in multiple states, not one state, multiple states, Medicaid for adults pays more than Delta Dental for a lot of procedures.
The state I'm in, Utah, is that way. It's like a little known secret.
I did not know that. Like people are like, oh yeah, we've been taking Medicaid for years and stopped taking Delta Dental or whatever.
Like,
it's just like, I was like, wait, what? We're like, when did this happen? Oh, it's been years. And it's just like, that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And that's because Delta Dental is also going down. Yes. When I started, that was like, you wanted Delta Dental, right? Like that was the one that was, now it's not that way, obviously. So yeah, that's very, very interesting. And that probably plays to your point. Why is that happening? Like it didn't used to be that way. This is a newer thing that's starting to happen. So why is that happening? It's happening because there's a lot of these economic things that we're talking about.
Yeah. So let me add maybe another layer I think that's interesting. And if any of this is ever boring, Gary, just be like, hey, Steve, let's move on to something else.
Yeah, I'm not even
Let me add another layer. So there's basically, as you're listening, you're probably thinking, okay, I've never realized that so many of these numbers or behaviors kind of all interplay with each other. So I kind of give this example, like there's all these different metrics that can affect, that we can predict if a patient's more likely to say yes to treatment or not. So another one of those pieces is, are patients paying their bills or not? So accounts receivable days, how long is it taking for patients to pay their bills? Does that make sense? So if there's a big increase in accounts receivable in the industry, then we can predict that we're probably going to have patients getting less treatment done because they're trying to catch up on bills. Does that make sense? I mean, intuitively. Yeah. So I'll just share my screen here so you guys can kind of see what that's looking like here coming into this year, the collections dashboard. So a couple of things to note. Accounts receivable days is just from the time we complete treatment on average, how long does it take to get paid for services?
It doubled.
And we've got some like bad trends in Q1.
Is that, and you're probably going to show this, but is that because people are trying to do more financing and different things like that?
Potentially. No, actually, no, because financing, no, not at all. Actually,
would pay out, right?
Financing would pay out immediately. So your AR days on that is going to be wicked fast. So that would actually, if there was a dramatic increase in patient financing, that would bring our total.
Dental sucks at patient financing. Dentals might be one of the worst industries that I've ever seen. Like Apple's figured it out. Cars have figured it out.
Yeah, you go to any like automotive, like dealership, car
even
place,
Apple's like, dude, people aren't going to keep buying our phones. They're $2,000. They're just going to wait. They're like, let's just finance it and just roll it up into a monthly payment. Like everybody's figuring it out. Like dental's like, no, I don't like the financing fees. It's like, there's ways to make that work, guys. There's ways to make that work.
100%. And there's so many good options in the market now that are creating great cost competition for financing as a merchant. Like, so of any time to engage with like ratcheting up our financing options, today is the day, man. Like,
and it's easy for the patient to get it. It's never been easier for the patient to it takes 10 seconds for the patient to get it. And then they waterfall too, where it's like, hey, they're less likely to get declined. And if they do get declined on ours, they're going to waterfall to like 3 or 4 other options. So they're going to get something. So they're not walking away feeling stupid. Like, oh, I got I got declined. Like in dental just is so bad at this.
Yeah. And
I've
just so
seen all the
everyone hears
numbers
the
on the
number.
I've looked at the numbers on the back end of these practices that like
Uh-huh.
successful practices with finance companies, because I wanted to know like how many people are coming through the door and how many, and they're like, the finance companies are like, yeah, if someone's doing like 10% of their patients, 20%, like it's so low. There's so much opportunity there.
So much opportunity. And just so people hear it, like in the past, it was, I think the expectation was like, oh yeah, like if I do financing, then I'm going to give up, 10% of that. But now these days you can get, sometimes if they've got high credit, as low as like 3, 4, 5% is all you're giving up. So like, it's really something to consider. And of course there's like variables there in, this range of stuff, but man, like it's a no brainer. So a couple things that I want to highlight: accounts receivable days has gone up. And
It's
you can
doubled
see like
for our audience listeners. It's 20. It was 22 in 2021, and it's now 42. So it's almost doubled.
yes. If you look at, so I've got 3 buckets now. I like to look at accounts receivable, and this is just like the whole market under 30 days. So like how much is like, we call it current, right? So the work has been done less than 30 days ago. That number has
It's
been
almost doubled.
increasing. So it's taking us longer in the current month to collect.
That
When I
one's
look
almost
at the
doubled as
bucket
well, yeah.
of accounts receivable that's between 30 days old and 60 days old, it's been increasing. And when I
More
look
than
at the
doubled.
bucket that's 90 plus days old, it also has more than doubled.
Yeah.
And so it's just taking us longer to get bills paid, which also makes you start to wonder, like, are those bills actually going to get paid at some point? Or are we going
Probably not.
to
How
have
much
this
do you
wave
attribute
of
this to
write-offs?
labor? How much do you attribute this to labor? Because just people are just, offices are spread way more thin.
Yeah, good. So then there's that question as well, right? So that's a great question. Why is it happening? This is one where it's tough. With some of the treatment presented stuff, I can drill down to like, okay, like what codes are getting presented at which volume? But this is one where we kind of have to leave ourselves to a little bit of conjecture, right? Like, why is that increasing? And I would
Not just increasing, but doubling. Doubling's a lot.
Yeah.
Anytime you double something, it's a big deal. That's huge. That's a big jump. So labor. So what could be some of the reasons? Like if it was your practice, where would you mentally start that conversation? So I would start it right at like, do we have the processes and the manpower to actually follow up with the volume of people that we're seeing? That's where I would start. Where would you go from there?
Yeah, I would just remind everyone there's I've got my little reactions on. I turn this off. I just had balloons for those that aren't watching. So there's two places, two sides of the coin for this problem. One, we have to have team members in place, like you said, that actually collect the money. And on the other side, though, remember, we have to have patients who are willing and able to pay. Oh man, I'm gonna just turn those off really quick. Those are quite distracting to me. Okay. So
That's awesome.
those are the two sides of the coin, right? So I 100% agree with you. There has been clear staffing issues in dentistry. I mean, even our company, 18 months ago, we hit a couple of like lows as a company where like we had some turnover in support that was bigger than we expected. It was a little harder to replace those. We're like, crap, like what are we gonna do? And we were sending messages to some of our customers saying, hey, like help us get through this. We are gonna like double down on this investment, and practices felt that same pain. Like, so that's a reality, right? So when you have new team members that don't have legacy knowledge, don't know how to collect from insurance companies, maybe are a little less calloused with like just asking patients for money, like, hey, you need to pay your bills. You know what I mean? That can cause the number to go up. On the other side of things, there can be economic pressures that change the game, where it's well known that 2 years ago, everyone felt like money was free and easy. There were stimmy checks coming in. We were buying trampolines. We were putting pools in the backyard. We're we're just going for it as consumers. And we still are doing that today. Like there's a lot of really strong consumer spend trends, even though the cost of money is more expensive. Interest rates have gone up, right? There's a lot of those things. So it's interesting, but nothing is what's crazy to me, Gary. And this is not a conversation about like the greater US macroeconomic trends. But what's crazy to me is that nothing has like broken. Like I was convinced twice, like we were going to go into a recession, and we just never did.
Well, remember, so I don't know if you remember when Obama was president, I was told by everybody like this, when he finished his term, this is it. Like America's done. We're about to go into the work. I held all my money. I didn't invest in anything. And then we went on the most craziest bull run.
We just ripped.
In everything
Yeah.
ever. I was sitting on the sideline watching it the whole time going, oh, so
I
stupid.
wish I would have put my money
Yeah,
in.
yeah. So you never know. You never really know. But yeah, no, it can't. It's not sustainable. Like we have so much debt. Everybody has a ton of debt.
Mhm.
But the one thing that America has done a good job of is anytime that we've had a big crash, so you go all the way back to the Great Depression, they put in checks and balances so that doesn't happen again. But those checks and balances cause other things to break. So then we go through a housing market crash, or we go through the dot-com boom was another big one that they put checks and balances so that wouldn't happen again.
Yep.
And then the housing boom, and they put checks and balances so that wouldn't happen again. So a lot of people, now some people would argue it's the dollar that's next, you know what I mean? But what are people going to run to, you know what I mean? So
So
anyways,
right now there's some trends on like consumer debt where that's increasing. So we'll see. All I'm suggesting there is like it's still unproven as to whether or not that is specifically a reason why patients aren't paying their dental bills. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
yep,
I'm maybe stretching a little bit to say that is possibly the case, but because it's still unproven. Like we don't know for sure that is going to have a broader, big impact on businesses. But it's just important to note that yes, I agree. We've got to have all the right pieces in place, like patient financing. We want to have some make it easy for patients to pay. Like that's one thing, Gary, that's like crazy to me. I don't want to get like too promotional about dental intelligence in general, but just as you think about like what does a patient have to do to get a practice paid these days? And most practices still require the patient to like call them. If they're not physically there to swipe a card, call them, give them a credit card over the phone. And it's just crazy. So like anytime we can, especially when the problem's getting worse, like try to remove as many barriers as possible to get money from the patient into your bank account. And that is going to benefit you, right?
Yeah, it's always going to help you. Yeah,
regardless of who you work with, just please find someone,
I think the people who start figuring out patient financing first are going to like absolutely crush on every front, on big and small. They're going to, because there's a disconnect on, if you ask a patient how much a crown is, it's going to be about 90% less than what the dentist actually charges. If you ask a patient how much a dental implant, all of it, all the way up, there's a huge disconnect between what the actual cost is and the perceived value to the patient, like huge disconnect. So you have to close that somehow. And you do that through monthly payments and different things like that. And dental's nowhere near solving that at all, unless except for some of the bigger treatment guys, they figured it out. Okay. I got a question for you. So you said no-shows are at 12%.
Yeah.
Do you have new patient no-shows percentage?
I don't, but I'll make a note because that would be fascinating.
So I think
I'll go track it down. Yeah, what do you have? Because you probably actually do have that.
Yeah, so it shoots up through the roof. It's way higher than that. And then what happens but everybody looks at it. Everybody looks at totality of no-shows and they go, yeah, we're at 10%. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And so they make no decisions around this. But what I'm seeing is people are putting these patients way out. Then there's actually a nuance even below what we're talking about here. So you got no-shows, total no-shows. Then you have new patient no-shows. And then inside of that, you have marketing new patients versus patient referrals.
Yeah.
And the marketing new patients actually no-show at a much, 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 much higher rate than both of those other categories because they don't know you. There's no trust. There's no relationship.
Yeah, intuitively makes sense, right? Like they're the least connected to you so far. Yep.
Yes. Yep. They're basically did probably 1 to 5 minutes of research to pick your office. It was Google reviews. Are you near to my office? They read a couple of reviews, called you. They got that you passed the vibe check, and okay, cool.
Emotionless. Yeah.
Yes. And so then you put them, a month out, and then all of a sudden, so I'm seeing like marketing new patients. I should say, it can go all the way up to like 30%, which is like, oh, that's horrible. But then this is what's causing the pain of why my office isn't growing. The reason that my office isn't growing is because the patients that you're paying for to grow, that's why you do marketing, is to grow, not to break even. You want to grow. So you invest into marketing, and then those are disappearing. They're evaporating. And here's another crazy one that I would love your thoughts on.
Like you're getting all the conversions, like the marketing machine is working properly. It's getting the patient through this experience to the practice where they're actually creating an appointment. Like that's a big move to get someone all the way to that point. But then they're disappearing there, right? They're crazy.
Disappearing. Yeah, they can, and that number can go even higher. I've seen it even higher. I'm just saying, like, if the further you put them out, the higher that number goes. Here's another one that I find fascinating. The average
that alone, I'll just say this for listeners, like that alone is going to have such a dramatic impact on your growth rate as a business. Like if you have a really good system in place to create a relationship with them quickly, right? Time matters so much, like in sales that we always say, like, time kills deals. And I know that people don't like hearing sales in dentistry, but like the concepts are the same. Human behavior is the same. So if someone, even if it's a fairly emotionless decision, if you can get on them quickly, you're way more likely to be successful.
Let's use your data. I
someone
saw on
who
your
tries
screen
to
that you were
push that down the road.
Just a minute ago,
I mean, even a couple of weeks, I'm sure,
how
it starts
everything's
to like
going down or up in a negative way. The one thing that I noticed that you shared that didn't change, same day treatment conversion hasn't changed over the last several years.
Yeah, no.
And it proves your point. It was at 28%, and it stayed at 28% over all those years, even though all the other treatment acceptance is going down. Why is that? Because of your point. People want stuff now, and we're moved by emotion to fix it now. And if you don't get that, then it goes that energy or that money flows somewhere else. And so, getting a competitive advantage today that was not before COVID. Before COVID, it wasn't a big deal. If you can get a patient in within 48 business hours, you have a competitive advantage in your market. That's especially on the hygiene schedule right now. Okay, so here's another thing that I've been saying, and I just love just your thoughts on it. And I'm gonna say something that's pretty radical, but I think I know it's true. But I want your like thought of it from the way you guys see your numbers. Okay, so the average dental office loses 80% of their marketing opportunities before they hit the door. So you got your top 10%, and then you got your bottom 10%. So the top 10%, they all crush. So let's take them out of the equation. They're not part of the conversation. Then the bottom 10%, they just suck. Like they just everything's broken, bad leadership.
It's really quite sad, and that's been getting the bottom 10% since COVID have just continued to get like increasingly crushed. It's really a bummer.
It's horrible. Like it's horrible, and a lot of it is probably boils down to like apathetic leadership. You know what I mean? And just like, hey, we've kind of let go of the reins, and
they kind of lost the vision, not sure what to do. They're feeling financial pain, and that anxiety is overwhelming to them, and it just kind of like, I get it.
So I'm taking those out.
Yeah.
Now I'm just going to talk about industry average for those 80% in the middle. The average unanswered call rate right now in the dental industry during normal business hours is 35%.
Yeah.
So let's say you spend $10,000. Let's say Dr. Jensen, DDS, you know what I mean? You run a dental practice. During normal business hours, 35% of your calls go unanswered. That means if you're spending $10,000, you lose 35% of those opportunities. Okay. Boo. Those are off the table. Now here's the interesting thing. If it's a patient referral that calls your office, they're going to, and you don't answer, they're going to call back.
Yeah.
Even if they're a new patient.
Yeah. They're definitely the most likely to call back of all of them.
Yep. They'll just call back. Doctor referral, same thing. Existing patients will call back as well. They're like, oh, somebody didn't answer. I'll email them or whatever, right? Or I'll leave a message. I know they'll call me back. Marketing new patients do not do that. They just move on to the next office. Here's the next one. The average conversion on the phones for marketing new patients is around 50%. It floats between 45 and 55%. Well, you just lost the vast majority of your opportunities right there. Yeah. Well, that's half, but you also lost 35% before we started by not answering. So you just lost 80% of your opportunities. Now that doesn't even account for high no-show for these marketing pages. You throw that in, you throw that another 10, 20% in there, like you're losing almost all of your marketing opportunities, but you can't really quantify it because you blend everything together. And when you blend it all together, then it's just like, I keep hitting this glass ceiling. We're not growing. I'm spending $10,000 a month. I know patients are coming in, patients are scheduling, but we're not growing the way that we want to grow. And it's that's the ceiling that I've seen that keeps that 80% at that 80% middle class, so to speak.